the formality of what people think, what we're taught, isn't necessarily the route for everybody. And I think that there's, again, traumas and learning lessons and things that people have in their life that shape who they are. And for me, that was my daughter being born at 21, like having to figure stuff out, having to figure out, how am I going to get a job? I don't have a high school diploma. Like, where am I going to be able to build something? And stuff like that. And again, that was me being dumb. And like, why didn't I go back to school and get a GED at least? Like, I just didn't think like that. And essentially now, I have multiple 7-figure businesses. And I think that a lot of people can build this way, and it doesn't have to be the normal path, and you don't have to follow the curriculums that people do that are what are norms. And I do believe that there's a lot of opportunity, but I do also believe that you have to have a tremendous amount of perseverance, grit, tenacity, and the ability to want to grow and learn by other people.
You're listening to Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast, a podcast for those who are in and around the hospitality industry who love, live, and breathe what they do. You can join us for candid and unscripted conversations with hospitality experts and founders as we go deeper into their personal stories while they're sharing their triumphs and trials that got them to where they are today. I'm your host, Will Slickers, and you're listening to an episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. Now, let's begin. All right, Nathan, another question and a minute with minute, but my question is for new and existing users, what can they expect to be in the horizon when it comes to the devices and the services that you guys offer beyond noise?
There are a couple of things in the pipeline now that are pretty exciting for me as an employee and a salesperson of Minute. We're always trying to add new features, as evidenced by some of the more recent ones like cigarette detection or outdoor monitoring. And we have a few either launching now or that will be launching soon. For instance, our call assist service will bring the ability to have a human caller actually help make a phone call and deal with a noise event at a property so that it's not just an automated message. We have a couple other exciting ones in the pipeline as well that I won't talk about just yet, but stay tuned.
Well, you'll have to tune in to another minute with minute. So thank you so much, Nathan, and we're back to the episode. All right, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of Slick Talk, the hospitality podcast. And I am pumped. And I don't say this every episode, even though I probably should. But I've been looking forward to this episode since Jesse and I got to sit down for our pre-chat. And to take it back for all the listeners, if you can imagine, it's 2020, COVID's happened. We're all thinking it's going to be 2 weeks. Flatten the curve, all this great stuff. You're drinking, you're going out with friends outside, you're having a good time. Then there's this thing called Clubhouse comes out, and all your industry friends come on, and we just get to basically have a virtual audio party every day, every night, multiple hours a day. And that's where I first actually met Jesse. I knew of you, I think, prior to like in 2019 kind of year.
Yeah.
But then COVID really was what kind of tipped the scale. So Jesse, one, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course. And two, let's take it back to the Clubhouse days really quick before we jump into your story. Who got you on the app? And also what are your thoughts on how all of that kind of blossomed into today for you?
Well, first off, don't get me started on politics with COVID. So I don't want to go there. I don't want to offend anybody right now, but it was actually, you know what, man, I think, Will, I talked about this. I appreciated COVID, even though there was a lot of horrible issues that happened. I worked in healthcare, so I saw the damage that was being done. Like, there were literally thousands of people dying. Like, I'm not kidding. Like, that was actually happening, mainly older people in my market. I worked with a couple of people that actually passed away that were in their 40s, which is also another thing. But yeah, man, I think you're right. Everybody got on Clubhouse because, everything was closed, and it was a way for people to get out and express what they had going on when essentially, people weren't going out, and, there was people that were still going out and doing things. But for the most part, you couldn't go to restaurants. You couldn't go to nightlife. You couldn't, unless you were like in certain parts of Florida. There was a couple little pockets here and there. But yeah, man, the world was basically shut down. So we were able to connect with each other and talk about things that we loved. And that was, midterm, short term, all those things. And that's where I got to know you and like essentially Bill, like all these people that I didn't even know about, man. Like, I didn't really know the industry folks at the time, other than was like what Bigger Pockets was telling us about. You know what I mean? So for me to meet you and to meet all these other people, it was such a a really pivotal point in my life. I think it was like a lot of people, it really gave me it sat me down. It didn't sit me down metaphorically, but I got the chance to really think about like where I want to be at in my life, and is the job that I'm at, is that worth it? You know, and there was a great resignation. You guys all know about that, where people just decided to leave their jobs. Either they got fired or they left, and they created other businesses. And that's what COVID did for me. It allowed me to see a bigger picture and to see what I do, what I like and what I don't like, and where I was heading. Because again, we had a lot of time to think about it, right? So it really gave me that idea of like, I don't need to be here anymore. And just to give you guys context, I was working in the healthcare sector, business development, which is basically a fancy way of saying sales rep for hospitals and for these home health and hospice agencies. And I was driving to the Bay Area, which was like 2 hours one way, 2.5 hours, 3 hours, sometimes even. So for me, that was a 6 hour drive plus an 8 hour day of work, essentially. So you guys figure I was making $200,000 a year, which is fantastic money. You know, in the grand scheme of things, it's not very much, but for me as a living in a podunk town in Central California, that's like, dude, you hit the lottery. You know what I mean? So for me, just to have that, I was just very thankful to have that job. But then, you know, leaving it was another thing, and that was hard. And we can get into that if you want, but just kind of seeing where you want to go on this, Will.
Yeah, well, I definitely took a note prior to you jumping on the recording on, in my note, it literally says taking the leap. And so to let's set the scene a little bit better. I know we jumped right into COVID and Clubhouse just because I wanted to kind of also, I love sharing with the audience and listeners kind of where we meet and how the origin really starts. Yes, we met 2 years ago or 3 years ago, sorry.
Yeah.
But, finally here we are 3 years later to have this conversation. So to kind of give some perspective, what were you doing prior? Like you were doing health and all this other stuff, but what was the beginning moment? Because I know you were doing short-term rental and midterm rental prior. Like you
Mhm.
were still kind of working the W-2, doing the side hustle, building it up. So walk us through from the beginning you start and then to the leap, the quitting the W-2, going to the COVIDpreneur that was a term like the great resignation for sure. But I
Yeah.
think we saw a huge spike in entrepreneurship during COVID as well. So we'd love to hear from there. And yeah, that time period.
Totally. Yeah. So I bought my first investment property in 2015. And just to give you guys context, like my mom was an immigrant from Mexico. My dad was born and raised in Merced, which is basically kind of like an immigrant. I'm just kidding. Not an immigrant, but he was born here in the States. But they had real estate growing up quite a bit. And my parents were super Catholic. They ended up losing a ton of real estate based on the fact of letting people that had money issues stay in the home. So say somebody was not able to pay rent, that month would turn into three. And I found myself sitting in the back seat of a 1979 wagon, like the kind from National Lampoons. I don't know if you guys ever watched that movie where it's like wood. It looks like wood paneling. It's not. It's
Yeah.
just metal. I was sitting in the back seat. I remember vividly thinking about this. I was looking out the window. My parents were arguing. I've never heard my parents argue ever in my entire life. They were arguing. We were going somewhere. I remember like literally looking out the window, just being like, "Man, I wonder what's going on." Second part of the scene, I'm sitting in the back seat of a courtroom. My parents are up front with the judge, and on the right side of my parents, it was the tenants that they had in their home for 6 months that weren't moving out. And I remember the judge looked at my parents and was like, "This lady, this is what she does. She was actually in here 2 years ago, and
Mm.
she rents homes, doesn't pay rent, and then will stay for 6 months or a year, and then end up here in this courtroom. So like, this is what happens." So in my brain, I almost like canceled out real estate. In 2015, working in healthcare, I was on hospital floors. My job was to go to these hospitals. And I'm just giving you guys context of what my previous life as a child growing up, what my
Mm.
mentality was around real estate, so that it comes full context as we're continuing to talk about it. So I was on these hospital floors, and there was this really beautiful accent. And there was a lady that was saying things like, "Don't you know?" And "Isn't he a doll?" You know, and I was drawn to that. And I went up to her, I was like, "Well, where are you from?" And she's like, "Fargo, North Dakota." I'm like, "Well, what the heck are you doing in Modesto?" And she's like, "Well, I'm a travel nurse." And I was like, "Oh, that's cool. Like, where are you staying?" And she said Motel 6 on Ninth Street, which was like the dirtiest, most drug infested place ever. And she was working 15-hour days. And I was like, curious. I was just like, "How much are you paying for that?" And she told me, Will, that she was paying $3,000 a month for like literally a crappy hotel. In my brain, back in 2015, you could buy a home in Central California between 250,000 and 300,000 for like a pretty decent house. Your mortgage payment would be $1,500. So my brain instantly, without thinking about real estate for years, was like, how do I house these people? And how can I go to the source and connect with them directly where they will pay me as opposed to Barbara paying me? So, because essentially that was what I was doing in my W-2 job. I was a business development manager. My job was to connect with folks to have them send me referrals. Essentially, that's what it was. So my brain flipped on to like, okay, I could probably buy a house right now, or even rent a house and have Barbaras or other Barbaras that are same and similar stay, and I can make $1,000 from like literally a month without having to do anything other than furnish a place and then get a contract. So that's essentially what I did. Is I went down to the HR department. I found out that she got a contract with the hospital. And this is like a movie scene. I want you guys to think about this real quick. Maybe we talked about this before, Will. So I don't know if you guys ever seen a scene where like a door opens and it's slowly closing, and then all of a sudden it pans in on the very bottom of the door, and then a foot like literally will come in and stop the door from closing. That was exactly what I did. Like, I'm not kidding you guys. That was verbatim what happened. I open the door, I go in the HR department, and I say, hey, we have Barbara on Tele 3. She's a travel nurse. She works for AMN Healthcare. How do I get a contract with her to work like where I can get a property and house her? And I remember this lady, her name was Misty. She had a big giant badge. It was like this highlighter yellow color. And she was like, and I always call people by their name, so I try to find their badges or whatever. I think that's important. And she told me, like, you know what, we're having a hard time finding housing for clinicians. And that's where I was in my brain. I was like, okay, well, how do I get these people to do it? So I asked her, I just flat out was like, hey, if I'm able to get properties, is there a way that I can connect with you guys and essentially get a contract? And she was like, yeah, we're actually looking for that right now. We're looking for people to network with so that our clinicians have somewhere safe to stay. So right at that point, I went to my friend that was a real estate agent, got in contact with a lender. And within the next 60 days, I was able to find a property, lock it down, and get a contract with the hospital where they were going to be paying me $42.50 a month to house clinicians at that property. Whether my home was filled or not, they were going to be paying me that much because there were so many clinicians that were coming to the market at the time. So long story short, I bought a house for $340,000. It was one of the nicest neighborhoods at the higher price point. My mortgage was about $1,850. So all in, I was at $2,200, $2,300 a month. And the hospital was paying me $42.50. So I was already cash flowing, $2K on one door, which was unheard of in 2015. You know what I mean? So that was like my introduction to real estate. And subconsciously, I realized this years later, Will, learning from my parents how they lost a lot of their properties and stuff. I learned that subconsciously I did not want to have to rely on a tenant to pay rent, or I can have these agencies that will pay me. And that's what they did, is they pay me 3 months at a time. So if there's a clinician staying for 3 months, they would give me a 3-month payout. So 4,200 times 3, is essentially what we're getting. So you're getting this $13,000, $14,000 check. And I'm just like, holy smokes, this is amazing. And that's essentially how I started. And every year I just saved my money. I didn't spend that money at all. I kept it in a bank account. And at the end of the year, I'd have 24, 25 grand, depending if on expenses. If there was one year I did have a AC that broke down, I was like 8 grand to fix. But I used all that money to just buy another property. And I kept doing that year after year after year after year. And that was essentially how I discovered midterm rentals. And at the end of the day, it was really just solving problems. And we can dive into how I kind of went outside of that. But that was a sector that I knew had issues that still today, the healthcare industry. In fact, Forbes just had an article that came out about 3 months ago. 1 in 4 clinicians is expected to leave healthcare by 2025. And I personally have never seen so many healthcare workers that are looking to get out of healthcare by investing in real estate as like a scapegoat. Now more than ever, I'm seeing more clinicians start thinking about or investing or becoming part of groups or listening to podcasts just like this to get the knowledge to eventually leave. So the travel nursing sector is a $30 billion industry. So it's massive. It's not this small little thing. It gets really, really big. And I think most people don't see that. And a lot of folks will sleep on that specific, model. So, but yeah, man, that's kind of the origin story.
For me, that's crazy because I got exposed to hospitality and short-term rental stuff through hotels and just being in the industry, not from a real estate perspective. So hearing you say that, I'm like, man, I really kind of pisses me off. I'm like, I wish I bought a house in 2015 and just started doing stuff like this. Like, that's so cool. I love the natural curiosity too. And before we go into more like the midterm rentals, and short-term rental stuff. I would love to know, just from your childhood growing up and from your parents' lessons that you had to watch, whether they're painful lessons or actually good lessons that, ended up working out, what carried through outside of obviously like seeing the courthouse situation. What would you say really carried into this new mindset and shift, especially since you had real estate so shut off in your mind when that moment happened? What really carried through for that moment for you?
Yeah, I remember one day, I'm getting goosebumps talking about this because my dad passed away a few years ago, and
Mhm.
he
Sorry to hear that.
always told me, yeah, man, it sucks, but he always told me that real estate was such a positive thing, regardless of all the stuff they had. So they had about 10 properties, and over the span of about, I was 8 years old in the back of that car as a child, which I did not want to be dropped off in school in, by the way, because it was the ugliest thing on the planet. My kids are evil. But he always told me that it was, so over 10 years they lost, probably 6 properties, and I would say about 70% of them were because of shitty landlords. And again, my parents had a very they were not business owners, and that was the
Mhm.
problem. They weren't business owners. They were way too ethical and moral in a way that most business owners probably should not be to that extent, because they're taken advantage of. But he always told me that real estate was a win no matter what, because the longevity of it. So subconsciously, I didn't buy my first place, Will, until I was 34 years old. So that's the other thing too, is like, I think a lot of people listening to this are like in their 30s or in their 20s, and they're just, I can't wait to buy a place. Like, dude, I didn't start building stuff until I was 34, 33, 34 years old. And I'm 40 now, 41 now, and that time is, there's so much that can happen. So I think it's important for people to think about that, as they're building their real estate portfolios, whether that's one, whether that's 5 or 10. Like, you can start anytime and be able to do this. So hope that makes sense. But yeah, my dad always said it, real estate's good no matter what. Like, just hang with it. It's long term, long game.
Yeah. I had a friend send me something. I can't remember if it was on Instagram or maybe just a text, but more in the line of timeline. When you think about time, comparison one obviously is like the thief of joy, right? So me saying even on this podcast, man, I wish I bought a property in 2015.
I
Like
know I do.
comparing my story to yours, and we are all on such a different universal timeline that if you are 24 and thinking, man, I should have bought something at 19, well, you're 24. Like if
Yeah.
you were buying stuff at 34 or 32, then there's so much there. Their timeline is so different. Anyways, there's so many things that can go into it. So I love that kind of like analysis.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
You know what, dude? Like, now that you bring this up, it's a good point. Because in my 20s, like, I feel like we go through my 20s were was like, I was going through puberty. I know that sounds weird for me to say, but it was a mental puberty. I think
right,
that, in your 20s, you're trying to figure out who you are, what you're wanting to do, how you do things. But when you roll into the 30s, you're kind of like, okay, I somewhat get it. Or I'm starting to understand it. I think for me, my 20s, I was an idiot, dude. Like, my credit was screwed. I had like, back in the day we had cell phones. Like, if you were on the phone, they charge you for how much time you were on the phone. So like Verizon bills, and they were like $900, $1,000. And I just was like an idiot, didn't pay them. So going into my 30s, like, my credit was shot. And once I had that connection with, my friend that was a realtor, and I went and talked to a lender, and they're just like, dude, you have a 600 credit score. Like, you got to get this up to like 680. That's when
mhm,
my brain was like, my parents were right. I need to take care of my credit. And like, I didn't think about that in my 20s. And I think a lot of people do that to a certain extent. So when I see operators that are in their early 20s, so I have friends that are in their 20s that are just doing crazy things, dude. Like, I am so excited to see that they're thinking ahead, years ahead of where I was. And if I would have, and I hate to say should and could have, like, those are two words that I
yeah,
don't ever like to say ever. If I had a different mindset then and I was around the right people, I believe that I would have had a different outlook on money and investments. And this is why it's so important to have things like this, so people can hear them, have context, and be able to, think about things in a different way. I think right now, actually, I just posted today on Threads. I'm gonna give you my thought that I had. If you're not becoming smarter, healthier, wealthier, and happy, you're using the internet improper. Like, you're using the internet you're not using the internet properly. Like, we live in an age now, there's so much opportunity for us to learn. Like, somebody can just literally listen to your podcast, Will, and be able to
mhm,
build a portfolio. Like, we live in such a beautiful age. When I was
yeah,
growing up, we had the internet, but it wasn't as prevalent as it is now, right?
yeah.
So,
No, it's crazy that you say that. I pulled out my phone. I never pull out my phone on a podcast recording, but I
yeah.
have an automated message to myself every day at 7 p.m. that comes saying you're happy, healthy, building wealth, and creating harmony in and around your life. And I 100% believe all of that is like through the power of the internet, through the power of social media, through the power of podcasting. I 100% am a big believer in that. Obviously, I wouldn't be here if I wasn't, but I think what you just said is so true. We have like so much at our fingertips. I want to know for you, because when you put your foot in the door and talk to Misty and asked her about the contracts and kind of how to do all this housing, you know, for you, where was I know Bigger Pockets has been a big influence for you as well.
Yeah.
Where was your kind of big source that you went through? Did you start with searching anything online, or did you just say, Misty gave me this information, I needed to get my credit score fixed and like buy this house and get this done?
Yeah, I was starting to think about real estate. Like my brain was always set on numbers. Like by the time I'm 25, I want to have a house. I want to own a house. So like this is the thing when you put these goals for yourself at a certain age. Like if you don't hit those, then you kind of just forget it, and like it's like I can never do that. So my brain, that was my goal. Like when I was 25, I wanted to buy a house. Blah blah blah. At that time, it wasn't realistic. My credit was shitty. Like I didn't have a job that would sustain that. So I was like putting a lot of that stuff off. But eventually, I just did it right away, man. I saw that there was an opportunity. I looked at it like a business. And I think that's what set me apart from a lot of the people that I talked to, is that I had looked at this exactly the same way. And I wasn't one of those kids, Will, that like was selling baseball cards in the, on the fields, during elementary school. Like I didn't have the entrepreneurial mindset, but I had a business mindset. And I didn't even realize until that one moment where essentially I was able to see the need in my market and capitalize on it. And it wasn't just my market. It was like all these different hospitals in the Bay Area, Central Valley, Los Angeles, all had the same thing. They all had Barbaras that were coming. So I saw like, there's an opportunity. Like I see it right now. Now, how do I do something about this? And I just use the skills that I had with my job. And I think a lot of people have skills. I mean, you could be a teacher and like, why am I going to get into real estate? Well, teachers are exceptional listeners. And that's really one of the most important things about building a business, is being able to listen to people and then thinking about a way to adjust to the conversation. It's sales at the end of the day. And I think for me, that's where my strong suit was, is I was able to sell. Like I could sell things. And still to this day, like I feel like I'm a phenomenal salesman. I should probably be like a car salesman or something and probably kill it, but a realtor or something. But I don't know, man. I've always good at that. And I think that's where I realized like, okay, I can talk to these companies. I can pitch stuff to them. I can put together ideas. I can figure out how to save them money. And this is how I'll continue to build. And that's essentially what happened, how I was able to build a business. And I thought about it from a business from day one.
I love that connection to the job and the lessons and skills that you learn in a job and application to business ownership and entrepreneurship. And one of my favorite questions to ask guests on the show, it comes from another podcast I used to listen to that no longer exists, unfortunately. But the question and the theme, or maybe even the thesis to every guest on the podcast was, are you born or made? Are you created or wired? Like, what is your structure? And from hearing kind of you talk about it, I think I can guess your answer, but do you think you were born to be an entrepreneur, or were you made eventually into, through life lessons and experience and understanding, made into this entrepreneur that you are today?
I feel like traumas create who we are.
Hmm.
So whether, I mean, a lot of people can decide what trauma is. It could be one thing or another, but I feel we have a lot of this stuff in us already. It's really just finding that source and building on it. Again, if you guys look at it, my trauma as a child, my parents' first argument that I've ever heard that was like a intense argument was in the backseat of a car surrounding real estate. So fast forward 20 years, 25 years, me getting my first deal, it was based around that idea. And what was I doing? I was not getting paid by people. I was getting paid by agencies, multi-million-dollar companies. So subconsciously, and I'm a big proponent, like I really believe in like therapy and understanding yourself. So like I've been in therapy for years now. And this is like, I get to look at things from a different lens and a different perspective. So I think for me, being able to have that mindset and really seeing why I made those moves and subconsciously why they happened, it all goes back to that trauma as a child. So I think, to answer your question, that was a long-winded answer, that we have it in us. It's just really up to us to uncover and understand it and then build from it. I do think some people are wired to be entrepreneurs. And I think that is, again, by nature of, you have a family that is entrepreneurial and you see that, then you're going to essentially lean towards that. But for me, I had an immigrant mother who was a stay-at-home mom and a dad that was a biological engineer that worked for Foster Farms. Essentially, and you're going to hate me for this, everybody that I tell this is like, are you serious? Your dad was doing that? My dad worked in an experimental lab for Foster Farms. He was one of the guys that was pumping full of antibiotics to these chickens to get them to grow fast. They were basically genetically modified. My dad was part of that movement in the 80s, 70s, 80s, and then it died out in the 90s, but that's what he did. So he was just like a super hard worker, smart, intelligent guy. But, you know, he stayed at a job that he was comfortable at, that he hated, by the way.
Yeah. I know. Yeah, we have a very similar parent upbringing in a lot of ways with that, but it's really interesting to see how that all really ties in. I'm really, really curious. You know, I've seen you from the moment we met on Clubhouse. You know, I knew you talked about midterm rentals, and now I'm seeing you talk a lot on Instagram and socials. You've created a personal brand, and as much as for any of our listeners that are very much in the short-term rental space or very much in just hospitality in general, I do try not to use the term personal brand, but it is a thing in order to separate kind of how we operate as business owners. And so let me kind of get your mindset and kind of internal thinking from doing this business to then now being very public. You're talking on podcasts, you're creating content, you're exposing, what you see work and not work within short-term and midterm rentals. You've then now launched your midterm rental summit. There's just been such an evolution of your story and the way you have built yourself, which obviously you've talked about with therapy and stuff. But what's that kind of been like for you? What's maybe something that you had to overcome in order to did you have to get comfortable behind the camera, the microphone? Like, what was?
That's a good question. I don't like being behind the camera. I was one of those guys that did not want to be on camera. I thought everybody that gets in, it's like, I don't look good. I don't look good on camera. I'm too chubby right now. Nobody's going to want to listen to me. I thought all those things. But at one point I'm just like, if I need my own internal thought was not as good as, hang on, I'm saying this the wrong way. The way that I viewed myself and what I thought I can give to the world was more valuable to me. For me, because just so you guys know, I didn't graduate high school. I'm an idiot. I literally am an idiot. I didn't graduate high school. I was not good behind a class. I was not good sitting down. I'm pretty sure I might have ADHD. I've never been, diagnosed with that, but it was hard for me to sit still and to focus. And I didn't graduate high school, and I remember just getting a job right away. And then I had a daughter that was born at 21. That shifted me into dude, you got to do something. You have to create something. You have to go into a job. So I ended up getting a job as a sales rep. Lucky enough, the only reason why I got hired is because I spoke Spanish, and they were hiring for somebody that could speak Spanish. And if I didn't get that role, and I didn't see this guy that looked just like David Spade, had this charisma that was he was like the top sales rep. And in fact, sorry, I said that wrong. I was a delivery driver of oxygen. And I saw this dude. Imagine this, you guys. This guy walks into a door, and just picture a movie. He's walking around, he's doing this, pointing at people, doing this, saying, hey, what's up? And everybody's standing up, giving him high fives. I was like, I want to do what that guy's doing. Everybody likes that guy. And then I go outside and I see these driving this brand new BMW. And I was like, what does this guy do? And my boss was like, he's the top sales rep of our company. You're never going to do that. You didn't even graduate high school. Literally told me that. And I'm just like, well, okay, there goes my dreams. A job opened up for a position in sales. And I went to my boss and I was like, I want that job. I want to do it. I know I could do it. And they laughed at me because they only hired people with bachelor's degrees and stuff in business and marketing. They couldn't hire somebody, and they gave me a role. And they gave me the shittiest accounts on the planet that guy, David Spade lookalike, didn't want. And guess what I did with those accounts?
Made them some of the best accounts that the company ever saw.
Literally made them some of the best accounts that the company ever saw. And this was coming from a dude that didn't have a high school diploma, that everybody said was not going to work. They gave me 90 days to be able to do the position. And I literally crushed it. Became this sales rep. I was in what's called the President's Club at that company. And that's when you're high level, multi-million-dollar sales in a year. I was able to do that. And I think that's when the company was like, this guy could do stuff. And after that, they stopped hiring people that had business degrees and stuff. They just started hiring people that didn't have that, paying them a lower rate, obviously, but people do have skills, and college doesn't necessarily always bring that. So I think the reason why I'm bringing that up now is that the formality of what people think, what we're taught, isn't necessarily the route for everybody. And I think that there's, again, traumas and learning lessons and things that people have in their life that shape who they are. And for me, that was my daughter being born at 21, having to figure stuff out. having to figure out how am I going to get a job? I don't have a high school diploma. Like, where am I going to be able to build something? And stuff like that. And again, that was me being dumb. And like, why didn't I go back to school and get a GED at least? Like, I just didn't think like that. And essentially now, I have multiple 7-figure businesses. And I think that a lot of people can build this way, and it doesn't have to be the normal path. And you don't have to follow the curriculums that people do that are what are norms. And I do believe that there's a lot of opportunity, but I do also believe that you have to have a tremendous amount of perseverance, grit, tenacity, and the ability to want to grow and learn by other people. Those are really important traits of growing in the space.
Yeah, I love all of that. And, if you don't mind going down this route, I'm kind of curious, no high school diploma, no college, got the crappiest, shittiest accounts that this company could have passed off to you,
Yeah.
turning them to some of the best accounts that they had, going to the President's Club, having this mindset. And I want to correct you on some self-talk over here. You're not stupid. You're not an idiot. You're a smart dude, obviously. And so, what did that do for you? And I'm kind of curious because as a man specifically, I want to have a family. I know what I want. I know I want to have a wife. I want to have a kid or kids. I want to do I want to have that. I know I do. So what
Yeah.
did that also do for not just you from that mindset of, I'm stupid. I didn't graduate, da da da, and then to having now a daughter who gets to see her dad live such a wild and amazing example of you can literally do anything, even if it means not going down the normal route that everyone expects you to go down.
Yeah. Well, I think having my daughter woke me up to realize like it's not about me anymore. Because just like a lot of us, and even people that are, that have kids, like it's about them a lot of the times. And once my daughter was born, like I realized like if I can't take care of myself, how am I going to take care of this other little human? She's
Mhm.
relying on me. She's dependent on me. Again, this is going back to the childhood. My parents, my dad worked his ass off his entire life, like got a degree. He's one of the only kids out of 10 to get a college education. So that was the other thing too, is like my dad was this like formal brain, like super smart guy, like knew freaking Jeopardy, all the answers. Like he was one of those kind of guys. Like you're just like, how the
Yeah.
fuck does this guy even know this stuff? And then for me to not go that same route of going to college to do all those things, so that already put me in a mindset like I'm probably not the right person to like do these things. I'm not going to be able to do that. I'm going to rewind this a little bit. I skateboarded a lot in my childhood. And if you guys are familiar with skateboarding at all, or anybody understands that, it's like you do the same thing over and over and over and over and over again, where you're just trying to land like one trick. If I didn't have that like mentality of trying to do something and failing and continuing to do it hundreds of thousands of times, like I think that was such a big part of the growth for me, is being able to do something over and over and failing and then landing it and then moving on to the next one, the next one. That was a skill that I learned. And that anybody that was in sports has the same mentality, right? It's the same kind of thing. But I think there's something about failing so many times and then finally sticking it, landing it, whether that's a movement an inch different on your foot path, or your foot weight on a different part of the board at a certain time. It's just those little tiny movements are incremental, and it's what makes you land that trick eventually over time. I had that same mindset going into things where I'm going to try stuff. I know I might fail, but I'm going to continue to do it. So once my daughter was born, I was kind of like that kick in the ass. It's like, dude, you got to figure stuff out. You got a job right now. You see where this David Spade lookalike guy is walking around driving these BMWs, high fiving everybody. Everybody loves them, and then having that, like, I want to do that kind of thing. And what's a skill that one dude had? And he was able to have people know, like, and trust him. And I think if
Mhm.
there's anything that anybody can do, like one thing that you can, like, the one skill is be able to have people know, like, and trust you. And I know that probably sounds like, how do you do that? Well, if you just read one book, How to Win Friends and Influence People by Dale Carnegie. If you just have that one book and you study the crap out of that book, and that's the only book you're able to read, that's literally the one skill that you need to be able to build like a fantastic business. It doesn't matter what you're going into, because it's going to teach you how to connect with people. And I think that is so, so important. Just being able to connect with people.
Yeah, I love that. And it brings me back to my early hotel front desk days
Yeah.
where I brought it to podcasting, and I never really kind of talked about this a lot, but the number one thing I think you can tell when in customer service, when you're with people, whether you're in business or working in a job or anything like that, if you can listen, people will tell you what they want, even if they don't tell you directly. If they're not saying I want this, they will tell you within their time of talking, whether they're complaining, they're telling you about their day, their trip, whatever it might be, they will tell you something that is an underlying message for us that if you listen, you can pick up very quickly and you can be able to immediately apply, anticipate the need of what they just told you, even though they didn't know they told you. And then you can now bring it into a moment where it becomes, like you said, where people know and like you because you do something that outstands from everybody else and all the other conversations they have throughout the day. You actually listened, took it, and applied something to it. Now, I think that was like such a big moment for me. I'm curious, do you see that same thing within your business? Because I know you're doing content. I know you had your conference. Maybe we can go into more of your personal brand side now. But
Yeah.
even with guests, like guests complain about, hey, the AC is not working or whatever. But really, there could be a different underlying issue. Like maybe they're tired. They're 30 minutes before the AC is not working. We had a long trip here. Our kid was crying the whole way. Da 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 da. Like, there's so many things that you can use to kind of understand. All right, the AC might be not as cold as they want, might be broken. Who knows? But there's something else behind the scene that they're not really just saying direct. I'm curious for you. Do you have a certain skill that goes into that as well?
Yeah, I think listening is such an important skill, and the problem with that is nobody did anybody ever teach you, Will, where they're like, Will, this is how you focus, this is how you listen.
No, I'm like you. I think I'm undiagnosed ADHD for sure.
I remember a teacher. I was sitting in the back of a class listening, and her name was Miss Inkstrand. I'm going to call her out right now. She's probably not alive anymore, but I was in ninth grade in high school. She's like, Jesse, focus. Like, how do you like just focus? And I remember like raising my hand and being like, how do I focus? The entire class laughed at me. Like everybody in the class laughed. But I remember sitting there thinking like, nobody's taught me how to focus. Like, what does that even mean? You know what I mean? So I think there's a lot of stuff that we necessarily don't get in school. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because I think when you're in customer service, whether you're a waiter, whether you're a front desk bellman, whether you're whatever jobs you have, there's a way that you can apply those skills. We talked about it earlier, right? And yeah, everything that I've done, like the customer sales jobs, like I worked as in Walmart as a camera salesman, when I was like 16 years old. And dude, I didn't know anything about cameras, but I would tell people like, this is a camera I have at home. I've used it, and I'd play around with them and stuff like that. But then that's where you get to like listen to people, and they'll tell you a story about how I had this before and how it didn't work, and like, okay, well, here's a camera that will solve that problem. And again, it's like, yeah, how do you marry those things? And I think that again, the skills that you have internally that you've learned at whatever job you're at can be transferred to a lot of different things. But I think to relate to your question, I've always wanted people to feel comfortable in a space, and I think that's where hospitality is kind of in my blood. And that also goes back to like me being in childhood when somebody would come over, my mom would offer like a drink. Do you need this? Do you want food? And that's like classic Hispanic culture. It's like, how do we have this person feel comfortable being at home? Almost to the point, Will, where it's like, if you don't eat this, this is a disgrace to us. Like that's literally what would happen in Hispanic culture. Like if you don't take a bite of this, like we're all going to be pissed about it. So it's like, how do I have that same concept with my folks that are coming in, that are staying at our properties? At the end of the day, I want them to be the most comfortable they've ever been. And I think for me, I'm going to bring something up and it's going to make me a little bit sentimental right now. The reason why I love hospitality so much in Airbnbs and short-term rentals is because I lost my dad in 2017. And some of the best memories that I've ever had in my entire life were in these short-term rentals with my family. So for me, and I'm getting goosebumps talking about this right now. I don't know if you guys can see this or not. I don't know if my camera's going to adjust on that. But I truly love building a space for people to come, and then they're going to remember that feeling in that home their entire life. What other business can you be in where you're able to supply a memory like that for somebody? And for me, that's like why I do what I do. Like I love to take care of people. I love that feeling of them creating memories, being in a space, even if it's for a night or 30 nights or 6 months, them having something to walk away with and remember. And I think that's hard for a lot of people, especially now with with short-term rentals. People are getting into it for money, that, and money's great. Like obviously money's fantastic. We need to have money, right? It keeps the world going around. But at the end of the day, it's about taking care of people, giving people things that they didn't think that they deserved or needed at the time, and thinking about any potential issues or problems that can happen ahead of time and how do we resolve those. And I think that's what hospitality is about. It's about creating a space for somebody to be comfortable, to create memories, to think about all the potential issues that can happen ahead of time and mitigate those. But not everything's going to be perfect, right? But it's how you respond to those things is what makes you a brand, and what makes you create something that people are going to remember, and then know that this guy tried to do this or didn't try to do this, and At the end of the day, that's what you have to do. And you come from a hotel background, like you guys bend over backwards for people. And I think a lot of short-term rental operators should take that hotel mindset and adapt that to their, to their short-term rentals. That would go a really long way. But sorry, another long-winded answer.
No,
But
I love it. This is what the whole podcast is for.
yeah,
And dude, like you got me emotional talking about your dad. And so just well, I love that's how you can, sit back and remember him and also, apply to your current day, with short-term rentals, midterm, and for the listeners, we've talked about midterm rentals a little bit with you on this episode so far. One of the things I've seen really stand out with you as I've watched your kind of journey over the last 3 years is the balance that you have with the mix of portfolio type. And I don't want to shift, conversations super far into like, all right, tell us, how do you structure short-term rental versus midterm portfolio and blah, 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 because that's not really what the show's about. But, with you learning these lessons along the way, what have you found more, I've tried to choose my words carefully with stuff like this, but not impactful, but what has been the really big determining factor, I guess, for you to kind of do that split of short-term, midterm, hospitality focus versus like working with agencies and kind of getting that plug in? How do you structure that, and what's kind of been the learning process now that you've gone that route since the time that you've taken that leap from full-time W-2 to entrepreneur?
yeah, I love short-term rentals and midterm. They're very close connected. That's the thing that I want everybody to realize. Like short-term rentals and midterm or medium-term rentals are very close connected. If you have the ability to do both, that is such an advantage over a lot of places, because a lot of places have municipalities that don't allow short-term rentals, right? But for me, I like to leverage short-term rentals during peak season and leverage midterm rentals during down season. So essentially, we're mitigating risk. Any intuitive investor is going to think about risks ahead of time. They're going to think about, how do I continue to build a strong portfolio that has that doesn't have peaks and valleys. Like your peak is continually staying at top, and that's what an intuitive investor is going to do. Think about the stock market, where we have, COVID, everything dropped and it came back up and then it dropped. Like an intuitive investor is going to think about, how do I keep cash flow consistent all year long? And with midterm and short term, say you're in Houston, Texas, which is a market that I have property in. Houston, we kick ass in the summer, but when it slows down, like we're literally not making very much money at all. But if you midterm, you can essentially make pretty damn near close what your short-term rental numbers are. So we're making 6,000, 7,000 a month for the entire year, as opposed to 6 and 7 grand for, from April to August, and then a dip, 2 grand right around there in between. So now we're staying consistent all year long in those markets. But again, I think that there's a way to connect with companies and businesses where we're building a house on our own land. And this is something Mark Simpson said, and I love it. For those of you who aren't familiar with Mark Simpson, he's a direct booking guy. He said, at the end of the day, we're all employees of Brian Chesky, if you really think about it, because we have property that's listed on their platform. And just like you guys know, Airbnb sometimes will screw up. Like San Bernardino, like 3 weeks ago or a month ago, turned off literally every single booking that everybody had in those markets, flipped them into 30 days for like literally 24 hours. We're not reliant on that. We're not building a house on our own land by being on a platform like Airbnb or VRBO even. Granted, yes, they are a platform where millions of people see us, but for some reason, if something was to happen, you won't have that. And what I do is I go after these businesses where I create my own land. I create my own opportunities. I create my own folks that are coming to me. And the cool thing about this, Will, is that say I have 10 properties in a market and I have these agencies that are sending me referrals every month, I can sell that referral-based business for probably just as much as my properties. Maybe not as much, but that's a business in its own. You can't sell your Airbnb business as just your Airbnb business, because there's nothing, you're reliant on Airbnb. But I can now go to investors and say, hey, here's my portfolio. Here's what our net operating income. Here's the businesses that are attached to it. Here's the companies that continue to send us referrals no matter what. And this is what we're growing on. So my net operating income is changing. My EBITDA is changing. I'm being able to have underwritten deals from banks based off of the letter of intent from companies. So it's like I'm creating something legit. Not that short-term rentals aren't legit, but we're just listing on a platform waiting for people to book us. You know what I mean? So
100%.
yeah, I don't know if that makes any sense or if that was even off context, but at least it gives you a little bit of thought process behind what I do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I don't know. Have you seen I think it's a movie. Have you seen the movie The Founder? It's the story of McDonald's, where basically these two brothers create McDonald's. It's awesome burgers, great place for all these people. It's like Dick's Burgers, and if you ever go to Dick's in Seattle,
Yeah.
really good food, but they're operating like crazy. And this guy comes in basically and wants to franchise it and take it bigger than just this market. And great movie for entrepreneurs to watch. But basically, what he does, and it's a sad story, unfortunately for the brothers, he screws them over and starts realizing it's not the money isn't in the
Burger.
burgers. It's in the land. It's in
Yeah.
owning the real estate where the burgers operate. So he starts basically buying all this land, creating, all these franchises are popping up like crazy. He runs into cash flow issues, all this stuff. Long story short, at the end of the day, the brothers get screwed over because he owned the land, and at the end of the day was able to control and dominate how the company ran, and that was it. Like, he owned the land, so boom, took over, and now he was the founder of McDonald's and to what it is today. And so a lot of the things what you're saying with Airbnb, as much as I'm a big believer in the platform that's made a lot of us money and has made a lot of us be able, especially during COVID, be able to create this financial freedom and this lifestyle. 100%, you're right. They own the land. They could take it out from underneath you in a heartbeat.
Yeah.
So building out a brand and all this other stuff is super important. What advice would you give, maybe even to Jesse 3 years ago, that now about owning land and owning kind of the market rather than just the funnel? What would you say, like, is a big piece of advice that you give yourself or anyone listening today?
Yeah, the biggest piece of advice I'd give is skate to where the puck is going. I think a lot of times people are focused on like, here's a shiny object, I'm going to go after it, whether that's short-term rentals or not. If you look at smart money, which is institutional money, Wall Street money, if you are able to pay attention to what they're doing ahead of time, typically they make moves 3 to 5 years before the general public. Blackstone was just raised $30.4 billion. What are they doing with that money? They're ditching traditional assets like commercial buildings, things like that. They're getting rid of those, and they're building for the next 3 to 5 years. So they're diversifying their portfolios. Guess what they're getting into? Go ahead, Will. Just
Short-term
take it.
rental.
No, midterm rentals, extended stay
Oh,
hotels. They're buying single family homes to connect and have people stay there for more than 30 days at a time. You guys can all go look this up, Google it, and look it up online. So they're essentially getting away from what traditional assets where people were investing. Commercial real estate, which is kind of getting hit hard. When you start seeing institutional money, and by the way, those companies hire Princeton, Harvard graduates, the smartest people on the planet, to look at data where it's at now and then project where it's potentially going to go based off of like COVID, things like that, like what we've never seen before. So that's a good indication, like, okay, here's where the market's heading, is looking at smart money, institutional money. So I would say, again, look at where the skate where the puck is going rather than where we're at today. And I think that's what separates a lot of intuitive, smart investors that are thinking, they're forward thinking as opposed to like thinking about today. Because real estate, again, at the end of the day, you guys, is long game, and diversification is so, so important. And if you watch like Charles Schwab or Warren Buffett, all these like really smart people, they don't put all their eggs in one basket. They're diversified, because if one fails, then they have this other one that picks them up. So I think it's really, really important to watch what those people are doing. They build credibility. Wall Street, smart money has been doing this for years and years and years, But not only that, but real estate has been the same for hundreds and hundreds of years. There's a time, which is time is now, where it's hard to find a cash flowing long-term rental. And if you can't find something now that pencils in long-term, what do you have to do? Short-term, mid-term, there's other ways to do it. So I think that real estate, as the markets continue to evolve, we're going to have to be way more creative with putting together deals, how we can outsource them, how we can use short-term, mid-term together, and what are the hotels doing? What are these other agencies doing? What's Wall Street doing? So just really pivoting. I think that's what I would give myself. I didn't start having that mindset probably until COVID, but before that, I was thinking in just like here and now kind of way.
I like that. That's great advice. And I think I gave you a heads up, and I'm glad. So to give some context too, I had another recording this morning with somebody, but I canceled it due to I didn't think it was really aligned with me as a person or even what the listeners really want. It was very anti-normal podcast guest I probably would have had. So I canceled this morning, and I told you that every time we have a guest on the show, we have a question for the guest from the previous one, and you can leave one for the next person.
Yeah.
I'm glad I have this question for you because I think it was perfect. It was divine. It was not made for the other person that was supposed to be on this morning.
Yeah.
And so the question is from Jason Reese. And I don't know if you met Jason, but Jason and I got to connect in Nashville at STR Wealth, and he's very into AI, but he's got properties out in Nashville. And so from Jason, His question is, if you are on your deathbed, what would have you wanted to accomplish by that time? And if you are not on the path to accomplish it, what's going to make you get on that path?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think about things from my deathbed all the time, like in perspective to that. And the reason being is because I think about things like, is my future self going to be happy with what I'm doing right now? And I really
Yeah.
relate that to a lot of things. So yes, I would say I'm on the path that you know, I'm teaching my kids about real estate. I'm teaching them how to grow businesses. Them going to the midterm rental summit, seeing 400 people like in there to watch me speak was like, holy crap, my dad's doing something cool. And I don't think
Yeah.
they ever had that context. They like, your dad's on YouTube, whatever. Like he's a wannabe guy, whatever. I think once they saw that, they were just like, I can do whatever I want. And that was one thing that my parents told me as a child all the time. They were always like, you could do anything you want. We live in this fantastic country where literally people come here from all over the world because this is a land of opportunity. Like you could do whatever you want. And that is true. Again, we have the internet, we have all these things. So yeah, I would say that I'm on the path right now. I just want to continue to educate people, to have them understand like you don't necessarily have to follow the traditional path. To have them understand like you don't necessarily have to follow the traditional path. You can invest in real estate in a different way. You can house people midterm. You can create a business out of your real estate portfolio. So yeah, man, I'm definitely. That's a good question, and hopefully the answer was good enough for you, Will.
No, I love it. I love it.
Yeah,
I love how you start the answer with, I think from my deathbed all the time.
I really
That's
I think that's so important for people to do that because I think about this daily. Like everybody that we know, we're going to lose one day. And for you to have like, that's a sobering reality. Not
Mhm.
only for you to spend time with people momentarily, to be present with them while you're with them, but also to leave something behind that when you're not here, your grandkids or somebody else can pick up. So for me, it's like, no, we have to give those to our children. And well, you don't have kids yet, but there's going to be a point when you do, and you're going to have these things in the back of your mind. Like, what is something that I can transfer to my kids? Because essentially, you're leaving what you know to your children, and then they're going to leave to their children. It's a cycle of things. So there's a Ed Milet says something that he's like, who's are you the one person in your family? And that's like, the one person that either builds wealth, that builds something awesome for people, that the family looks at things in a different way. Like I'm that one person. I know that for myself. And I would encourage everybody right now to really think about that. Like, who's the one person in my family? How can I be a difference? How can I change the demographic of what our family has been used to? And are you that one person? How do you become that one person that literally changes the entire trajectory of a family? And I think for me, I'm that one. I think a lot of us are that one, and we might not
Yeah.
necessarily realize it or understand it, but yeah.
Yeah. No, I totally agree. I totally agree. I love that. And this has been such a fun episode. And before we wrap up, and I know there's so many things I think we need to do a part 2 or something, but
Yeah,
like the part of me that I want to like go into the midterm rental summit, and there's so many things. So I definitely think we need to have you on again. If
for sure.
anything, we probably just keep going. But I also want to respect obviously calendar stuff. But for you, what if you had to ask one question, anything under the sun for the next guest for the podcast without knowing who they are, who's scheduled next, what would that question be?
Yeah. Well, at first I was thinking of something silly, but I don't know if that's the best thing. I was going to ask, do you know what a squatty potty is? But I mean, everybody knows what a squatty potty is. I would say, what's the defining moment? What is one defining moment in your life that changed the trajectory of your life?
Mm,
Like one specific defining moment, and a negative one that what most people would say would be negative. And the reason why I bring that up is because my defining moment in my life was, that childhood drive to the courthouse. Like that shaped the way that I thought about a lot of things for a lot of times. And a lot of people will take that as a negative. So that'd be my question, is what's one negative thing that's shaped your entire life? Because I believe that adversity brings a lot out of people. Those
yeah,
hardships, having your back against the wall. That's when I'm at my best. And I think a lot of people are at their best in those same scenarios and situations. So that's my question.
I love it. It's like the term or saying about being uncomfortable, right? When you get comfortable, that's when you get complacent, and that's when you don't probably do your best work or you're not paying attention as much. But when you're uncomfortable, you can thrive in that environment. So I
Yeah.
really love that, and that's a great question. Now, Jesse, the famous question which everyone listening knows I'm going to ask, but they also know what the answer is going to be, is everything's going to be in the show notes obviously, but if you had one link specifically for anyone to connect with you, reach out, or even just follow along as you continue to build the empire that you've built, where would that one link be?
Yeah, I would say head over to my YouTube channel. That's where you're going to be able to get long form content that I break down these specific things on a regular basis. And that's on YouTube. Just type in Jesse Vasquez. I think it's Jesse Vasquez / Air Venture is what my name is, but I'll pop up there. That's the place to find me, or on Instagram at the real Jesse Vasquez. But YouTube is probably the best route.
Nice. I love it. Well, Slick Talkers, you know that I'll plug it all in the show notes. So make sure you like and subscribe to everything Jesse Vasquez as he's continuing to build and go on that path towards his deathbed, which sounds weird to say out loud, but in a good way, the great path of leading up to
Inevitable.
that moment.
Yeah.
Inevitable.
Yeah.
And Jesse, my friend, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast and just share everything you shared. I know for sure, and this is just like me running off the cuff here, but as men specifically, I know it's hard to share some of this stuff. I know
Yeah.
it's hard to kind of, publicly state failures or feelings or certain things that have happened. And so just to be the way you have been on this episode is super encouraging. I hope, obviously the listeners can take some kind of value from that type of, if that's the one thing they could take away, I'd be super happy and proud to have this as an episode on the podcast. So just thank you so much for taking the time and the opportunity.
Yeah, not only that, but share this with other people. I think that's really important. I'm sure you're going to say that already in the intro of this.
Yeah.
this. Like and
Yeah.
share, folks. Will, I appreciate you for having me here, man. This has been fun. I love talking about this stuff. I think there's so much opportunity for a lot of people, and you having a platform where people can listen and then take action. So it's awesome, man.
I love it. Well, you heard it here first, Slick Talkers. Make sure you like and subscribe to all the things, and we'll see you again